Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CHN and NHELD Connecticut Homeschool Info Session Part 2. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to pass the mic over to Diane Connors, co-president of CHN.
Hello, good evening. I just want to have a brief introduction here. We have a part 2 because there were people that were unable to attend last week that had expressed interest. So we have part 2 to cover material that they may not have heard and some additional material that we've received over the last week. And with that, I will turn it over to Attorney Stevenson, and she will present her material.
Good evening, everyone. I am Attorney Stevenson and a founder of National Home Education Legal Defense. Last time, to just refresh anybody's memory or to let people know what we did last time, we went over some documents that we have received after our May 5th request for under the Freedom of Information Act to obtain materials about homeschooling, about the Waterbury case, the victim who was held captive. And from those documents, we learned quite a lot. Not everything, but quite a lot to pique our interest. One of the main things that we received were copies of several drafts of a bill to regulate homeschooling. And what we can glean from that information is the first idea that the people who were involved in the drafting of this, which I'll get into in a minute, came up with was to regulate in many ways homeschooling and private school, and how the parents of kids in both private school, non-public school, and homeschool would have to show up every year at the public school to show that they were enrolled or they were being educated or evaluated or what have you. And if you didn't do that in the very first concept put forth and in the very first draft of the bill that we understand to be the very first one, it had a provision that they could compel the parents to re-enroll the children in the public schools. Subsequently, there were many meetings that were held, it seems, and by these participants, and what we believe to be the final version did not contain that coercion to compel parents to re-enroll. And they also took out a section that was in it previously where the children of homeschoolers would have to be vaccinated to attend. So this has been going on apparently from probably the day after the story about the Waterbury victim came out in the news up until the May 5th purported informational hearing. We won't go into a whole lot of detail about that bill. All that information and the emails themselves and the bills themselves have been posted on our website, on the NHELD.us website, and you can see them for yourself. In addition to the details of what we have written about what we discovered. Tonight, however, we're still going through documents. We had asked for documents from many of the agency commissioners, and including the governor. We had not received anything from the governor until very recently. And tonight I'd like to update a little bit about what we saw, and in combination with the other information we've already gleaned, update you about what we saw in the governor's documents. So to give you a little idea, on March 12th of 2025, the news story about the Waterbury victim who was held captive at home allegedly by his stepmother after being enrolled in the public school system for 5 full years and being starved, and having the public school system officials, administration, everyone, according to the principal there at the time, knew the child was starving for 5 full years. He was stealing food from other students, digging in the garbage to get food. They all knew it. They reported it, according to the principal, about 20 times. DCF at first said they had no records of this, and they somehow found a few records, But in the police report, the affidavit for obtaining an arrest warrant for the stepmother, information came through that this was happening, and apparently the information the police obtained was that the police and DCF went to the home only 2 times while the child was enrolled in the public school, knew that he was starving, and the allegation was that he was starving. And the 2 times that they went, the stepmother was there, the child was there, and the police warrant affidavit says that the child was told to say everything was fine, or he would get even less freedom and less food. And so when the police and DCF went to have their investigation, they sat there and talked with the mother, the stepmother, and she told them everything was fine. And the child said, yeah, everything's fine. And that was the extent of their investigation. And then they went home, and for the next 20 years, that poor child was held in captivity and had to set his house on fire in order to escape. So that's the background of the Waterbury case. And that story, as I said, came out. Actually, on February 17th, the victim set his house on fire and freed himself. March 12th was the first news story about that broke. Now, the people that were involved in the information we have obtained include the former OCA, Office of Child Advocate, Sarah Egan. She was pivotal in this whole saga. So the news story breaks on March 12th, and apparently Sarah Egan, the former OCA, began to get some media calls. And so she then contacted the current acting OCA, Commissioner Geo, and the two have conversations. Now, on March 13th, one day later, the current OCA, Geo, is reported to have talked to some folks, quote unquote, about general policy issues. 2 days later, on March 14th, Geo gets calls from the media and contacts Egan, and Egan emails Geo back. And then the Department of Education was giving information on homeschooling law interagency. Okay, so at this period of time, the first initial attempts were made to get information from the Department of Education. On March 15th, 3 days after everyone knew about this story, the governor gives a statement to the press, and he says, quote, that he was talking with our team, undefined, about what happens when, quote, a kid leaves school to homeschool, and says, quote, that's something we ought to talk about with the legislature. And Egan also gives a statement to the media about homeschooling. Now, bear in mind what I said about the Waterbury case. This child was not homeschooled. He was known to be starving for 5 full years while enrolled in the public school, and there's no evidence that he was ever homeschooled. There is evidence he was in the school system as an enrolled student. So that's March 15th, 3 days after the story breaks. Now, also on March 15th and 16th was the weekend. Egan and Geo confer over that weekend, and they confer with others as well after discussing it among themselves. And Egan talks to the DCF commissioner about strategies to, quote, move forward with policy discussions. Now, keep in mind, both Egan, the former OCA, and Geo, the current acting OCA, have supervisory authority over the state agencies. And in this case, DCF appears to have failed in its duty to protect this Waterbury child. And so he suffered for 20 years. Yet Egan and Geo contact the DCF commissioner to move forward with policy discussions. On March 16th, the DCF commissioner then meets with state representatives to, quote, explain what her agency knew about the case regarding reports that DCF interacted with the family in 2005. And the DCF commissioner says her agency has been proactively speaking with legislators. Now, this is March 16th, which is 4 days after the story broke. And she's already talking, Egan, Geo, and the DCF commissioner already speaking with legislators proactively about what? About homeschooling regulation. On March 17th, GEO has several meetings with the commissioners and the legislators. This is all in the documents we have from the governor's office and from the other agencies. On March 17th, GEO, like I said, has several meetings with commissioners and legislators. Egan also emails GEO and the DCF commissioner to have a, quote, Teams call to talk through the, quote, very salient issues regarding the right/ability of a parent to just remove a child from school and without follow-up. So on that date also, GEO reaches out to the committee co-chairs, all four of them. After discussions with Egan, GEO shares Egan's flawed statistics with them all. Okay, so here we have a reference to statistics, and that is Sarah Egan, in 2018, was the OCA in charge of the investigation of the death of Matthew Tirado. Very similar situation. Matthew Tirado was enrolled in the public school. He was never homeschooled, and he was starving also. And this time, the police and DCF did, the school called the DCF, excuse me, DCF came out with the police, and they knocked on the door of the mother of Matthew Tirado. And the mother did not open the door, did not let them in. So DCF, to its credit, filed a petition for neglect against the mother in that case, and with the court. And the court issued subpoenas for her to appear in court. And again, the mother didn't show up. And so they went out a final time to knock on the door again, and she wouldn't let them in. She didn't go to court. And so the attorneys involved went back to the court and the court said, well, what's the status? Why isn't she here? Whatever. And this is in a 45-second hearing. They said, well, Your Honor, she wouldn't open the door, couldn't do anything. She won't come to court, don't know what to do. And the judge dismissed the case. And then 2 weeks later, Matthew Tirado was dead. So what does Egan do at that point in 2018? But she issues a report on this situation. And her report was mostly about homeschool regulation. Again, keep in mind, Matthew Tirado was never homeschooled. She jumped right into it. Apparently, this is something important to her. It's known that she wanted to regulate homeschooling before the Matthew Tirado case. And definitely, she did this full report on homeschooling regulation. Again, nothing would happen to the agencies involved in that situation, or the police, or the courts in the Tirado situation. No one was fired, to my knowledge. Nothing was publicized about any accountability at all for any of those issues. And time went on. And then we have in 2025, the knowledge that same time, I guess, while Tirado was going on, this poor child was locked up as well. Again, not homeschooled. But yeah, what does Sarah Egan do? The minute she hears about the second case, in the Waterbury case, she jumps again to regulation of homeschooling. Now, in her report in 2018, she came up with some statistics to show, or so-called statistics, to show supposedly the need for regulation of homeschooling. Well, those statistics were flawed, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But going on with this timeline here, Egan, again, what she does when she's contacting everybody, all these agencies, the commissioner, the governor, all of these people who are involved with these teams meetings, etc., and to initiate that discussion, she sends a copy of her statistics in the Tirado report. She sends it to everyone, the governor on down. So that sets the stage for everyone to now think, oh, homeschooling, we have to regulate homeschooling. Why? Based on Egan's report in 2018, which is now recirculating as a basis for why you need to regulate homeschooling after the Waterbury child who was enrolled for 5 years and starving. For some reason, it's automatically a homeschool problem. So now you have this information with these statistics being circulated again to, as I said, all of these people, including the 4 co-chairs of the Education and Children's Committee, the governor, the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, Fran Rabinowitz, and other people, a few other people that, are not necessarily. Egan, of course, was involved in these discussions, but she isn't the OCA anymore. She's just an individual. And there were a couple of other individuals who were involved in this issue. And after, let's see, March 19th. So now March 19th, the story came out on the 12th. 7 days later, Egan and Geo are discussing this, and they come up with what to do, send out the Toronto information and the need to homeschool. But then Geo sends out one more thing. She sends out her quote unquote concepts for regulating homeschooling. And these were sent in addition to the other people, and we know from the emails, they were sent to Leeper and Maher of the co-chairs of those committees. Later in the day on March 19th, Geo sends her first draft of a proposed bill based on those concepts, and that was called the Keeping Children Safe Act. She sends that to DCF and the Department of Ed commissioners and the committee co-chairs and Fran Rabinowitz of CAPS, probably others too. So 7 days after the story breaks, the former OCA and the current acting OCA come up with a proposed bill. And in that proposed bill, the concepts were, as I said, to compel children, if they don't follow the regulations proposed, to re-enroll in the public school. Now, this is March 19th. Many more meetings took place after this Keeping Children Safe Act proposal is distributed. At least 12 revisions of that proposed bill were made between March 19th and May 5th that we know of. At least the first one included the compel and the re-enroll kids in school, public school, if they don't comply, and the vaccination. Now, those 2 provisions apparently were not in what we believe to be the last of the 12 versions of the bill that was drafted before May 5th. But they could be, anything can happen. This is a proposed bill that was supposedly final before May 5th. After many, many meetings, Zoom meetings, in-person meetings, discussions, etc. March 24th, now with some of the information from the governor's documents that they were sent to us, which really weren't much of anything. It's mainly media clippings of, articles and everything about what was said at the time. So on March 25th, it would appear that the governor, this is quoted from the media clippings, for the first time, the governor reviewed potential changes to laws in response to the Waterbury case. Of course, those changes were not explained in any detail. We know now that they were already drafted, but that did not come out. April 9th, the governor's records show talking points for a radio interview he was going to have. And the talking points included, quote, what can be done to prevent kids slipping through the cracks? And should anything change with DCF? Example, expunged records after 5 years of no activity, question mark. These talking points also say that Connecticut does not have clear guidelines around withdrawing children from school for the purpose of homeschooling. That the state has a clear legal interest in ensuring the safety of education of their citizens, and it needs a thoughtful balance. There are those who take advantage of the system, and that's what I think we need to look at. That was his talking points for the radio interview. On April 21st, the governor's schedule shows, quote, prep meeting on homeschool mandates, unquote. The governor was involved in all of this personally and through his aide this whole time during these discussions and about the quote unquote mandates. The governor's aide also is quoted as saying she's meeting with the governor and with Speaker Matt Ritter, quote, to discuss the proposed mandates in advance of the governor's meeting with legislative leadership this week. That was the week of April 21st. It also noted, the aide also noted, quote, the two specific issues that prevent us from immediately proposing districts allow homeschool students to access school-sponsored extracurricular activities are immunization and SEAC eligibility rules. She said other concerns also are important and, quote, require additional discussion. However, the two issues I've mentioned most likely have more legal implications than the issues that are problematic due to resourcing needs, unquote. April 23rd, the governor's schedule shows a memo regarding proposed homeschool mandate meeting and, quote, meeting with proposed homeschool mandates. That meeting with legislative leadership was proposed regarding proposed homeschooling mandates. The governor met with the co-chairs of the Education and Children's Committees and says, quote, this meeting is at the request of the legislative committee chairs regarding proposed homeschooling mandates in response to the recent case in Waterbury involving a 32-year-old man who was allegedly held captive by his stepmother since he was 11 years old, unquote. It also says immediately following the recent Waterbury case in February 2025, the Office of Child Advocate approached the State Department of Education and DCF regarding proposed mandates for homeschooling, and their agreed upon changes are reflected below. And then it quotes them. I'll read some of this. You can see all of these concepts again on the NHELD.us website, but some of them are, quote, at the time of withdrawal from school to show that the child is receiving equivalent instruction elsewhere, the parent or guardian must personally appear with the child to provide 1, proof of enrollment in a non-public school, or 2, notice of intent to homeschool, including description of the curriculum to be used and documentation of a health assessment from a physician completed no more than 14 days prior to the student's date of withdrawal from school for the purpose of homeschooling. Annually thereafter, a parent or guardian providing equivalent instruction, which, by the way, does include non-public schools or private schools, shall personally appear with the child to provide either a proof of enrollment in a non-public school or renew the notice of intent in homeschool. Additionally, a parent or guardian who is homeschooling their child shall provide a health assessment in either grade 6 or 7, and again in either grade 8 or 9 or 10, grade 9 or 10, and provide documentation of an annual evaluation of the student. Homeschool students would be exempt from school immunization requirements. On or before January 1st, 2026, the State Department of Education shall issue guidance on an annual evaluation. And nothing in the proposed mandate shall entitle a student receiving equivalent instruction elsewhere to public school privileges. That was April 23rd, and what that email showed. It also showed, as part of these regulations, in addition to the proposed changes to parental duties, it's also proposed that the other statute regarding local boards of ed, 10-220, be amended to require the following. Upon receipt of documentation that the child is receiving equivalent instruction elsewhere, each local or regional board of education shall notify the parents of the requirements of Section 10-184 and review all records or of allegations, investigations, and reports maintained by the school district and determine whether a report is required. That would be to DCF as mandated per mandated reporter requirements. So even if you withdraw, the change would be for the local school boards to do this investigation of their records and determine whether, just because the parent is withdrawing the child, that they should be reported to DCF. Then we move ahead to May 4th, and the acting OCA Geo provides advanced copies of her summary and full report on what? Homeschooling. And on May 5th, we have the informational hearing. Now, we're still awaiting additional documents from the OCA and the governor and other people as well that we've asked for information. We also have filed 3 appeals for denials of documents already requested, one for the governor, one for DCF, and one for CAPS. Now, what we are stressing here, what we've found out to kind of summarize this whole thing is that the public did not know that all of this was going on behind closed doors before that May 5th informational hearing. We did not know before May 5th and before these documents were provided to us that draft legislation was already finalized or its contents. What we knew on May 5th was what we were told in public, and that is that the legislators wanted to know more about homeschooling. And we were providing information to them so they could figure out what to do. All the while, this bill and all the 12 iterations of it were already being discussed by these officials behind closed doors. More importantly, it seems to be led by the former OCA, Sarah Egan, and her statistics that she somehow came up with in 2018. And we have put out information prior to this time on the OCA statistics, just to let you know briefly, and I'll now hand it over to Diane, why those statistics are very flawed and should not be the basis of any legislation. Here's why in a nutshell. Neither Egan nor Geo are statisticians. Geo is just relying on Egan's work before. So I'm going to refer back to Egan here because she's the one that came up with these statistics. Egan's figures are inaccurate and misleading. She did not conduct a scientifically accurate comparison. She did not establish a control group of non-homeschooled public schoolers. She did not isolate a single variable. She did not conduct a legitimate objective comparison. She took a random sample of a particular subset of homeschoolers between the ages of 7 and 11 without any explanation for that subset. She did not identify which or how many of the sample homeschool reports to DCF were substantiated or for what reason the families were reported to DCF. She made no comparative figures for reports made of any similar subset of public school students, and she has not provided access to any of the raw data or records of the reports to DCF for anyone within government or without to verify what she did. So I have a few more statements after this, but Diane, I think that's at this point that you should go over what information you have regarding those statistics that were used. I think you're muted. Can you hear me, Diane? Go ahead, and you don't have.
Okay.
Okay, there you go. Okay.
I am going to mention something before I get into some of these statistics. And when I'm done, Pamela Cashew is here, and she's from Teach CT, and Donna Person is here from Teach CT. And we have Nicole, Megan, and Jennifer, some additional board members from CHN that are here. But Pam has done a 3-part series that CHN will be publishing soon. Hopefully this weekend. It's been an intense babysitting week, on the overall situation going back to Toronto, and she expands to some national and global issues that she's going to address. But first, before I get into the statistics, I want to mention that in these FOIA documents, there was, as we mentioned the last time, communications going on in many directions that went down to the level of the co-chairs of children and education. And we've spoken to legislators on those committees that knew nothing about any of this. So that is further evidence that this was intentionally to be secret and deceptive. And here's the real clincher, in my opinion. There were people emailing within this secret group, and they named themselves Team Kids. So they were coming up with all of this information based and driven by these flawed statistics that people simply accepted without researching. And at least 3 of the legislative aides were also engaging in that communication to the degree that they were offering their opinions about the ideas and those concepts for legislation. So think about that for a minute. Legislative aides were part of these communications. There was some media involvement as well, and chiming in about what they thought should or shouldn't be included. But we have legislators who are supposed to be serving their constituents that didn't even have information about this. And I'm talking about a number of them, not just one of them. So they're either all lying or they're not. And I don't think they're lying. I think they're telling the truth. That is not okay. That is not how our government is supposed to be functioning. So we have this little clique called Team Kids that is looking to have coercive legislation such that if a parent does not show up in person, their enforcement measure will be that they must enroll their child in a public school, which is a failing public school. Reports have come out. Let's see. Just in the last few weeks, there's new information that has come out from the nation's report card, along with some Connecticut articles talking about the academic failures in the public schools, and the safety issues are known. There is a Facebook page called National Children's Safety Issues that you can look up. It's a public page. And on a daily basis, there are multiple cases that make it to the media. And of course, there are plenty more that don't. The abuse toward public school students from the adults that are in the schools, sexual abuse and physical abuse, is 15 to 20%, K through 12 nationwide. Peer-to-peer abuse has been cited at 40 to 70%. So what was that we were worried about with the homeschoolers? Well, let's look at those numbers. In Connecticut, there are, as of November 2024, not even a year ago, so the number's fairly current. Connecticut has 727,462 children ages birth to 17. So if you do very simple math, I am not a statistician, I don't claim to be one, but we're talking simple common sense math here. With that number of children, and looking at the DCF website, and it is stated on there that pretty much every year they have about 3,000 children in care. So you take 3,000 and divide it by 727,462, and you come up with 0.004. Change that to a percentage, and it's 0.4%. That's a very important number, but it is far higher than the number of homeschoolers being labeled as abusers or neglectors of their children. So let's back that up to one of the infographics that the OCA made. She reviewed 6 districts, and curiously, they were very large districts. So I think we're all bright enough to see where she was going with that. We're going to look at worst case scenario. And she found 380 students were withdrawn from school to be homeschooled over a 3-year period. Well, so she, had to boost up that number, 380 students over a 3-year period. That's 126 per school year on average. And 139, which comes to 43 per year, had at least one prior accepted report to DCF. Well, what does that mean? I mean, people don't always understand how DCF works. it doesn't mean a whole lot, especially in Connecticut, where anybody can report to DCF for suspicion, which is not probable cause. It should be probable cause. However, it is what it is, and in this state, you're expected to prove that you are innocent and you're assumed to be guilty. There are over 60,000 reports, 65,000 each year into DCF. Approximately 46% of them are accepted for investigation. So that's 27,600 to 30,000 a year. On any given year, there are consistently about the 3,000 children in care. So 3,000 divided by 27,600 is 0.10. So approximately 10% of investigations become substantiated. That's important. However, that also includes false substantiations. There are many legal firms in Connecticut and nationwide that deal with false substantiations. It's no joke. Back in the beginning years of DCF, if you were investigated, you lost your children 66% of the time you were substantiated. So that should be disturbing to anybody. Okay, so moving forward. So first of all, this 43 families, with some of them 4 or more prior accepted reports to DCF. Okay, that sounds really horrible. And if you don't dig deeper, you could be misled by that. We're talking about 43 children, okay? So it's a few families. If there are 2 to 3 children in those families, we're talking about 14 to 21 families that withdrew their kids over the course of these 3 years who had reports made. They were not substantiations. So given that about 10% of investigations end in substantiations, that would then come to 1 or 2 families per year at the most. And keep in mind that these flawed stats that she used anyway, curiously came from the largest cities. So while we would all hope for a number of 0, compare this to the public schools, it paints a very different picture, because all of those other calls are either from very young children, families with very young children, or they're the school-age children, which is what the majority of them are, over 500,000 of them. So that would be 5,000 children versus 43. Where are the children safest? Reports to DCF can be for many reasons that have nothing to do with being substantiated. And that's really important. That includes the weaponization of DCF. That includes the homeschoolers that have their children enrolled and perhaps they're going to PPT meetings and it's not going well. And then the parents are looking into homeschooling. And one time at a PPT meeting, they say, that's it. We've been looking into homeschooling. We're going to withdraw our child. And the response from the PPT team is, if you withdraw your child, we're going to report you to DCF. Okay, that counts in that statistic that the OCA said for reports being made. Nothing to do with substantiations. Very misleading. So let's see. I went over all that and make sure I didn't miss anything. All right. So the alarm should not be ringing to regulate homeschoolers. It should be ringing loudly for the children in public schools who are statistically at serious and large risk of being undereducated and physically and emotionally unsafe. So as far as the OCA's concept for keeping children safe, she says the parents must show that the child is receiving equivalent instruction in the public school. Well, who defines equivalent? Public schools are failing to meet even basic academic standards. If the public system itself ranks poorly in literacy, math, and critical thinking, How can it be used as a benchmark for equivalent instruction? This is a false premise that the state has moral or educational authority to determine equivalence when it is consistently ranking near the bottom in national assessments. Her next call is for proof of education. So remember, you're guilty until you prove your innocence. They're not, but you are. Proof of education must include personal appearance and portfolio reviews. So this is compulsory surveillance of innocent families with no probable cause, as I already mentioned. Forcing personal appearances and portfolio reviews violates the principle the parents, not the state, are the primary educators of their children, affirmed in numerous court decisions. Requiring children to appear before the state annually is invasive, coercive, and un-American. Children are not wards of the state unless proven otherwise through due process. The OCA further says if documentation isn't provided, the child must be re-enrolled in public school. This is educational coercion, using the threat of forced re-enrollment to compel compliance with arbitrary state standards. It assumes state ownership of children, flipping the presumption of innocence on its head. A family's educational choice should not be criminalized unless there is credible individual evidence of harm. The OCA further stated, the state will cross-check enrollments and conduct in-person checks if enrollment isn't verified. This is a surveillance state tactic also, not child welfare. No such sweeping system exists to ensure public school students are learning or safe. Ironically, children who disappear inside the public school system due to truancy, homelessness, or bureaucracy often receive less scrutiny than homeschoolers targeted by this proposal. And as of February 2025, that number reached approximately 100,000 children in the state of Connecticut that are chronically absent. That's disturbing. Where are they? There is no constitutional authority for the state to conduct in-person investigations of families without specific cause. This is an attempt to turn normal parental choice into grounds for suspicion. The OCA further stated, districts must investigate past DCF history upon receiving a homeschool notice. This creates a guilt by association system that revives suspicion not based on current evidence, but on prior, often unsubstantiated reports. A history with DCF does not prove abuse, especially given how often calls are made maliciously or in error. Using this to trigger new investigations is prejudicial and unconstitutional. It weaponizes mandatory reporting and incentivizes retaliation against parents who leave the system, essentially punishing families for opting out. The real issue is not, as we have stated from the very beginning, homeschooling. It is the failure of public schools. Public schools are hemorrhaging students because of failing academics, rampant violence, and politicized curricula. This bill shifts the burden of proof from a failing system to parents who are proactively seeking better education. If the state truly cared about children's well-being, it would be auditing the failing schools, cleaning up the violence, the bullying, and the dysfunction, and offering academic remediation for the thousands who graduate without basic skills intact. If the state cannot guarantee safety and quality in its own schools, it has no moral authority to police parents who are trying to do better. And that's what I have to say. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Pamela Cashew, and she is going to share some information that she has.
Let's see if I can get that unmuted. Thanks, Diane. I wanted to go over some of the, I wanted to go over some of the statistics that you mentioned and I think that Deborah mentioned, that are troublesome in the current report and that are repeated or actually mirror the prior report from Sarah Egan. That was back in 2018 when the OCA came in for another informational forum, and we walked into the legislative office building with messages to look at the headlines in the Hartford Courant. It was the first that we had seen the number of the 36% reported percentage of children removed from school to be homeschooled, subject to at least one prior child abuse or neglect report. And as both of you have pointed out, it is inconsequential to have a report. What matters when you're looking at these statistics is whether or not they've been substantiated. I'm looking at information available, excuse me, on the website homeschoolingbackgrounder.com, and there's analysis there of that initial report that points out the problems with it. That I'm going to just read some of it because it's faster to do that than to try to summarize. The 36% claim has 4 components: students removed from the school, their families, accepted reports, and whether or not allegations were substantiated. Only the substantiated reports should be considered because of innocent until proven guilty. To find out how many families there were with actual substantiated cases of abuse, we would start with the number of families accepted, subtract out lower risk families, and then subtract out families with only unsubstantiated reports. It follows that fewer removed students came from families with substantiated reports, and you've mentioned numbers like that today, Diane, from the current OCA report. So the Child Advocate used a non-random sample of 6 school districts to come up with that 36% number. Later, however, after we held a press conference that year to question the fact that she was subpoenaing records, that morning we were shown emails that she had sent to the legislators, signed together with a representative of the Coalition for Responsible Home Education. So there was an outside agency working with the OCA at the time, Sarah Egan, and they made that relationship official when they sent that email to the legislators. So we have someone outside the state of Connecticut who had even less skin in the game then, who was trying to influence legislation in Connecticut. After that first press conference, Egan subpoenaed a sample of 18 other school districts for their records, supposedly to support the earlier findings. And what happened? Those records, that report was never released. The records were never updated. Her report was never updated. We never learned about what she found out in those 18 other districts. Perhaps it wasn't as favorable as she wanted them to be. And so we just didn't hear any more about it. Another thing I'd like to point out is that other studies are currently showing that in California, there was a study shown that CBS services did not change the likelihood of future child abuse. An umbrella review of 44 publications about reducing child abuse in high-income countries found the results were not visible. What does that mean? It means it's not working. The current Child Protective Services system across the country is not working. The highest rates of child abuse occur before entry into the school system. So Connecticut has the same pattern as national abuse rates. Gradually declining abuse rates have no visible dip as children enter school. Studies also show that higher regulation of homeschoolers does not lessen abuse. You can find those kinds of studies at NHERI.org. That's NHERI.org. And so putting more regulation does not stop abuse. It creates more bureaucracy. It is expensive, and it is used as a weapon against homeschoolers. And finally, it just doesn't solve what's happening here and what's happening in Connecticut. We need to look at DCF. We need to look at what can be done with the Child Protective Services instead of innocent homeschoolers. Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Deb.
Thank you, Pam. I would like to say a few more things before we open it up to questions. Okay, is that all right? Can you hear me? Okay, all right. In my opinion, this and backed up by these emails and documents that we've received, this appears to be a witch hunt started by Sarah Egan and at the behest of Egan, followed up upon by Geo, the current acting OCA. With all the other state officials involved, either being duped or willfully falling in line. More importantly, those state officials lied to the public from, or at least, shall we say, kept from the public from March until May of 2025. Why do I say that? They met behind closed doors, drafted legislation behind closed doors, and by omission, kept everything from the public when they never spoke a word about the meetings that occurred, the discussions and editing sessions that took place over those months, and that a final draft was completed well before the May 5th informational hearing. They sat before 4,000 plus homeschoolers and told them all they wanted to do was find out information about the laws and consider what to do about them, when they already had a final bill completed. Why are they doing this? The Waterbury case was never about homeschooling. The issue is the failure of the state agencies. And proposing legislation about homeschooling is an easy way to deflect attention away from where it should be on the failures of those state agencies. It's all about the agencies and holding them accountable. It's all about allowing the agencies who are scapegoating homeschoolers to investigate themselves. How can that investigation be objective? If there's anyone going on, which it doesn't appear to be. No one in any state agency was held accountable for the death of Matthew Tirado. Egan's trick of deflecting attention away from the agencies worked that time. Well, it won't work this time. I can assure you of that. We know the game that's being played, and we have the evidence. Soon we will have even more evidence, and we will not quit until the whole truth is finally known and until agency failures are exposed and those truly responsible are truly held accountable. So at this point, I would love to have any questions. We'll be happy to answer them. And I don't know how you want to handle that, Diane, but please, if anyone has any questions, now's the time.
Jessica's going to read them.
Okay.
The first question that's come in is a question regarding what Attorney Stevenson was saying about the various versions of draft legislation. How can they force anyone to enroll when it is also they who took away the religious exemption and forced many out of the system? Are they planning to forcibly inject children that they demand to re-enroll? The whole thing seems not well thought out at all, and I'm actually mostly compliant for reasons for homeschooling. My reasons for homeschooling have nothing to do with vaccines, but I'm just thinking out loud for the many out there who come to homeschooling because the legislature removed the religious exemption.
Very valid points. How can they do it? They can do it because they have the power to do it. Again, their very first thought was to compel re-enrollment in the public school, and their very first thought was to have homeschoolers vaccinated. That's what we see in the evidence. But we also see after those 12 iterations that they removed those two parts. For how long? I don't know. Will it be in the next iteration? Will they propose it in the next session? I don't know. But that's the problem. We have people that are doing this behind closed doors and who have not allowed the homeschooling community to speak up on their own and tell their own stories and have them heard, nor have they had any investigation of the agencies involved in the failure to protect the Waterbury victim or the 100,000 students who are missing or chronically absent from the public schools. I don't have all the answers, but it's an excellent question.
The next one is a comment. It says the OCA report had varying timelines. The 380 over 3 years was pre-pandemic and then applied to pandemic, post-pandemic, consistent removal rates. Anyone homeschooling knows that there was a drastic increase and they tried to skirt it. Any comments on that?
Diane, would you like to comment?
Well, I mean, it's true. There was a huge surge. We saw a surge of about 2.5 times the numbers what we had, close to 3 times the numbers. And these people were getting their kids out because with the distance learning, when the complete shutdown was happening, was going on, and the parents were seeing the types of things that the kids were being taught, they were shocked. They did not agree with a lot of what they learned. And there were other issues like if you have 2 working parents and now they're working from home because of the shutdown, and they have multiple younger children who need to be on devices, getting instruction from the teachers at conflicting times, not only to their work, but to each other from child to child. And the parents couldn't do it. And I remember I tried, the homeschool community got the backlash of that with parents that were reaching out, like, every day, like until early in the morning, until late at night. They were frantic and they didn't know what they could possibly do. They didn't know about homeschooling. And we helped them. We had so many, we were having multiple meetings, doing the homeschool 101 meetings, 2 or 3 a week at some times, to help these people and teach them what it is they needed to know to make the change. And they did. What happened, and a lot of them were professionals from the system itself. And then what happened was they realized when they were homeschooling how beneficial it was for their child. And I had a special education director that I know tell me personally that they observed the special education students increase their success rate academically by at least 50%, along with their behaviors, because being in the home environment was so much better for them. And the parents stepped back, and we heard people saying, the parents saying after weeks and months, this is really great. I didn't know that homeschooling was like this. It's really great. I'm not going to send my kid back. So that happened. And then there were what we affectionately call the forced homeschoolers, because their religious exemption was removed and they didn't have a choice. Some of them went to private education associations. They created micro schools. They created pods, all forms of private school. They did what they had to do. A lot of them left Connecticut if they were able to. So all these changes were going on, and there was quite the surge. But this wasn't just Connecticut. This happened across the country. And the big reveal was, wow, this is what home education is like. This is fantastic. And the overwhelming majority of them, when it was time to go back, didn't go back. They didn't want to go back. And it's just been downhill ever since. I mean, the public schools are struggling. Anybody knows that. It's not a secret. Where is it going in the future? I don't see it stopping. I read projections just the other day, and off the top of my head, I don't remember who put this out. The statistics with the curve going the way that it is, that we will have gone over the 50% mark of children being homeschooled across the nation by 2030. That's only 5 years away. So our nation is going through a huge shift. It's not just education, it's everything. People are taking their own health personally. They're taking personal responsibility for their own health. They're moving back toward more natural ways. More people are gardening and making their own food. It's a consciousness shift in this country, and it includes education for certain. So, we'll see where it goes, but COVID absolutely pushed it along.
All right, the next question, did any legislators agree to discuss it further? I think what they're referring to is, and you can correct me in the comments, is the OCA and the information that came out of the governor's office that they were all wanting to discuss things moving forward. Were any legislators involved in desiring to discuss things moving forward?
Our request for information only went up to May 5th. I don't know any further than that. I do know that it was pretty well set by the end of the 12 versions before May 5th. I didn't see anything more than the 12 versions. And to the best of our knowledge, that final one did not include the compulsion to re-enroll or the vaccinations. But that was just up until that point. We have, legislature meets every year. So I don't know.
I don't know if this is helpful to answer that question, but not because of anything that we've done, but we've been approached by a number of the Republicans, and they are planning meetings all over the state to address this issue. And we're grateful for that because they've listened, and there are some Democrats that have also listened. There are some Democrats that are homeschool parents. So that is all bothersome to me because, our nation is struggling with a very strong and intense polarization right now. We all know this. It's not new. It's been going on for a while. It didn't used to be like that. Homeschool freedom in this state has been sustained clearly and definitely in a bipartisan manner, and we would like that to continue. Furthermore, there are states, I want to say 10 states in the last, I don't know how many years, not that many years, that have been heavy-handed with their homeschoolers, and they have decreased regulations. I believe, if memory serves correctly, this year, Oklahoma is one of the states that decreased regulation. Most of the states in the country have very low regulation. And even CRHE, with their global agenda, they have even said that requiring a notice of intent, paperwork, that's not going to stop bad things from happening. The bottom line is homeschooling needs to stop being scapegoated. We need to stop allowing the conflation of freaks that do terrible things to their kids at home because they are sequestered in their home. That is not homeschooling. It's not public schooling, and it's not private schooling. It's a whole different category, and it's about time it gets labeled as such. Because in this state in particular, it's a minority of people that have been so negative towards the Connecticut homeschool community when these parents just want the best for their kids. And if there are a few outliers that DCF has caught because phone calls have been made, that's a good thing. But the numbers are pretty clear. It is definitely an outlying situation. And as I already said, and I don't need to repeat, punishing or trying to gain this coercive control over an entire community of people who are doing right, not only right by their children, it is a superior form of education, and all of the data supports that. So, that's my answer.
I'm going to move to this next question because, and then flip back to another one because it's along the same lines about asking about representatives. Has Attorney Stevenson received any documents yet to FOIAs about the end of the informational meetings by Patrick Biggins? And I think they're referring to the working group.
The answer is no, we have not.
All right. The next question is there any updated information about this moving forward next session?
We, again, the material we received only went up till May 5th. We don't have anything yet regarding the next session. But again, they have a bill prepared, so it would be easy to just submit that. One would assume. I don't know any more than that.
It's also an election year. I will share this. It's a slightly off topic, but since we have had access so far to over 3,000 FOIA documents that we've gone through, that included parents in the homeschool community writing to their legislators, and they are Democrats, and they're very upset. They are incensed over the way this community is being treated and accused wrongfully, and accountability not happening where it needs to happen. And in their letters, they all said that even though they have been lifelong Democrats, when it comes to voting next year, they will be flipping their vote. That's not, I am telling you what they published, and there were not just 2 or 3 of them, there were many. That doesn't even get into what people are saying within the community. The bottom line is the legislators are public servants, and it is not for them to go along with the status quo by secret meetings from government agency heads who are driving an agenda and including naming themselves Team Kids and including 3 legislative aides offering their opinion about what should or shouldn't be in a bill and shutting everybody else out. These parents aren't stupid. That's why we're revealing this information. We're being as transparent as we can possibly be and revealing the fact that they have not been that. So the process has been corrupted. We have legislators that are complaining, and this is also a nationwide problem. It's a crisis that our nation is in my opinion. We have legislators that talk about the internal politics of leadership threatening them with I will call them promotions and demotions. That's not exactly the accurate term, along with threatening money for their district for this project or that project. I mean, is that where we are? Is that who we want to be? Because it's not okay. It's not okay. It needs to stop. And we need legislators that are going to have a real backbone and are going to call this crap out for exactly what it is, corruption. And when you have over 4,000 people going up to the legislative office building and chanting for almost 10 minutes, hands off our kids. The kids were also chanting. It was the media that started it, but they went along with it. Somebody said to me, well, I didn't care for that choice of words. Well, put your big boy pants or your big girl pants on and get over it, because you're listening to the people that are telling you how to vote, the will of the people that have been shut out. Their voices were shut out. Debbie and I were allowed to be in the hot seats for 6 hours under false pretenses. And we did it. We did it. We had a lot to say, and we openly answered all questions. We were completely transparent. With all of this other stuff going on behind the scenes, it is unacceptable. And some of the media is just as guilty. The FOIA documents clearly show specific people that apparently are not journalists, but they are activists. And that's not okay either. So this state's got a lot of work to do. We have a lot of true homework to do, and we need to find out who the real adults are going to be, especially in the legislature, because this is unacceptable.
No more kids need to die on the watch of those agencies, and somebody better stand up and hold some people accountable for that, because that is truly unacceptable. There's no excuse for that.
Yeah, we have kids in the schools, 100,000 that are chronically absent. We have children in schools that have committed suicide because of unresolved bullying. There is horrific bullying going on. The police are called in a number of districts on a very regular basis. And we don't have dead homeschoolers. We just don't.
The final question that I have right now is, when does the Children's and Education Committee start meeting in the next session, and do they ever meet off session?
They do meet in special sessions, and I believe there was word that the governor may call a special session, not for this issue in particular, but I'm sorry, I haven't followed up on that particular question. But you can find out all of this information about when the legislature meets, how they meet, how to contact them, etc., at the ct.gov website on the legislative branch, and you can look at that up for yourself. And NHELD has been for 30 years telling people, please don't take our word for anything. Don't take the word of any government official for anything. Please do look up this information for yourself and act to protect your own children and your own way of educating your child. That's crucial, because you cannot trust anyone, obviously, for telling you the truth, and you cannot trust anyone for actually saying anything that they're doing, apparently, because they're all doing it behind closed doors, as we're finding out. So the more you can research these things on your own, the better off you will be, and you will be empowering your children too, watching you do all this and standing up for them. That's most important, and that's the way our system is supposed to work. The legislature works for us, and we're the ones that need to protect our rights and our freedom when others are trying to take that away.
All right, that's all I have from the chat. I did put links in there for everybody, from some of the links that have been mentioned throughout the evening, as well as the government one you just gave, Deb, NHELD website, the chhomeschoolnetwork.org website. Does anybody else on the panel this evening have anything to add?
Donna?
She's muted.
There we go. I just put it in the chat. There was that news article mentioning a special sessions, and somebody just talked about it. And in that, there was a mention of a 30-page education.
That's right.
Something or another that was going to be perhaps looked at in the special session. So how could we find out information about that?
Well, one way is to FOIA the documents, but one would presume that they would have it on the legislative website when they're ready to actually tell the public. But I didn't see it up there yet.
Okay.
Well, if there are no other questions from anyone, thank you all very much for attending this session. We hope we've helped you learn a little bit, and we will continue our efforts to get the truth and to bring transparency to this whole issue. Thank you again, and you can contact us anytime.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.